Rick Horrow, beyond the boardroom, inside the baseball, basketball, football world of a trillion-dollar sports business, and somebody that's helped shape it and has always been front and center, Sonny Vaccaro. He's the best-known guy for his tenure with Nike, signed Michael Jordan. Then he left Nike for Adidas, then Reebok, founded the ABCD All-America Camp, showcasing high school basketball standouts. You may have heard of some of them, Kobe Bryant, Dwight Howard, LeBron James, just to name three. You don't need to name others because, obviously, those three are the start of a long line of relationships that Sonny has. 30 for 30 documentary about Sonny Vaccaro entitled Soul Man. It aired a couple of years ago. But there are a whole bunch of issues in college sports that involve Sonny directly or indirectly. It's an honor to have him. How are you?
I'm fine, young fella. Looking forward to doing this interview.
Good. Awesome. I'm glad Sonny addresses me as young fellow. That's very important to my psyche as we go forward. So let's talk about the modern college basketball sports apparel business, obviously paying coaches to use the Nike brand, Reebok, Adidas, etc. Tell us kind of the nature of how you got involved in that and realizing that that was a very key, legitimate way to take a foothold in the sports business. How did that get started? And let's give us some perspective on that.
Completely by accident. It's just, as most of my life has sort of unfolded over these last, 78 years of it, I only can address how I lived it. So asking the question how, the marketing started on college sports, it definitely started with Nike in 1977 when I came up with a thought that I gave to Phil Knight and Rob Strausser, who was first in command after Phil at Nike at that time. They had really nothing to do other than in a running shoe situation. It was a very young company, $25 million in revenue, I think, at that time, where I suggested to them, because they wanted to get involved in basketball, since I had been very close and started the first high school all-star game when I was 24 years old in Pittsburgh called the Dapper Dan Roundball Classic with my childhood buddy, Pat DeCesar. I grew into an era in life of basketball camps, all-star games, and then eventually got me to this, to go how it started. Some kid at a camp of mine said, Mr. Vaccaro, what if they did some different things with tennis shoes? At that time, they called them tennis shoes. And I said, what do you mean, whatever the young man's name was? He said, well, we wear tennis shoes everywhere, the church and school, and, play basketball in and that. And they usually look like the poor man's thing. Why don't they make tennis shoes? And I'm embellishing the words now. But the thought was the young person gave me a suggestion that tennis shoes could be more appropriate in other things too. And then 50 years later, we find out that there's stylish on them also. You wear them with tuxedos. But at that time in 1977, no one thought that. I went to Nike, introduced about 14, 15 different pair of shoes at an Italian friend of mine named Bob DiRinaldo from my little hometown in Pennsylvania, some prototypes. I met the Nike people. They took my shoes. I never saw them again 9,000 years later. But we went to lunch, and then they started talking to me about basketball. And then I somehow in a conversation said, well, if you really want to get into basketball, why don't you just pay the college coaches, give all your shoes away to these teams free, and you'll get publicity you've never gotten before. And that's the innocence of it was. It was a mind thought by me, an idea, that it was something that we wouldn't have talked about. I wouldn't have gone to lunch at the Chinese restaurant with them. If the kid wouldn't have mentioned. This never would have happened in the way it happened. I guess someday someone would have started it. But mine was simply a logical, extension of my life. Kid made an idea. I said to them, they asked me a question, pay the coaches. And basically what we did from 1977 to 1988, when the first all-school deal in the history of sports was signed by a shoe company and a school, was the University of Miami, no less, with Sam Jankovic, who was the athletic director of the University of Miami, and a young man who graduated, and at the time he called me, he was a major labor union lawyer in Washington, D.C., called me and said, Mr. Vaccaro, Mr. Jankovic would like to do an all-school deal. So going from me paying coaches directly and them wearing the shoes and the kids wearing them and selling product in those intervening 7, 12, 13 years, other than also signing Michael Jordan in Intermediate, but the college coaches were first. University of Miami is the one that changed the world with an all-school day. That's how it happened. Most of the things in my life, just like Jordan for a minute, I never knew Michael Jordan. They asked me a question. Who would I sign? How much money do we have? I said, give it to the kid. They signed Jordan. So staying on that, but going back to the industry that we're not talking about, it's a multi-zillion-dollar industry. Nike's one of the most successful corporations in the world, and it all started a long time ago with paying the coaches.
Well, the interesting piece about this is that most ideas that are good start fairly innocently and evolve from there. Can't think of a better visionary opportunity than you and Sam getting together and doing all of this. The bottom line, too, is years ago you had some perspective, and now you have even more. Looking back on it, what would you have changed about how the industry has evolved as far as amateur kids getting paid? And I know it took O'Bannon's litigation to even begin that, so kudos to you. But how would you have raised? You wave a magic wand, you got it at your disposal, you change the industry. How do you do it?
If you're talking about changing now, Rick, how you do it is what happened. A major mistake was made by major players that got exposed by the federal government in a crime as opposed to illegal recruiting. The only way we would have had this conversation, the only thing that would have been meaningful for the next years, because we have found out in the past the most inept organization, and I say this with no bias towards the human beings, but bias towards the facility here, and the facility is the NCAA. These people govern an operation that brings in billions of dollars by their mausoleum in Indianapolis. And I'm not making fun of them to ridicule them again. I'm just telling the truth. I don't know. I can understand why the pyramids, why castles were built. I don't understand why that thing in Indianapolis was built, because they have no reason other than to protect the money that athletes generate for them to be involved at the levels they're involved. So what I've seen and what happened just 2 weeks ago or a week ago, I guess, the evolution of the next step in amateur, and that's the funny word. There is no amateur in college athletics, but they've been putting this idea in front of human beings for about 100 years, they being the NCAA. The only thing I can say about it is one of the nicest things about our society are sports. Then one of the best things, even above professional sports, is people ideologically rooting for either their school that they went to, the high school they went to, a friend that went to it, or the old Subway alumni trick where you just evolve into being a Notre Dame fan or a Pitt Panther fan if you grew up or if you were somehow connected by the umbilical cord. There's nothing better than college athletics, except there's been nothing dirtier than college athletics for a long period of time. But we fail to accept it because we love it so much. But we've come to a point in 2017 where the love has now gone into breaking laws, not rules. And I think a lot's going to happen. And I hope a lot. I'm very sad that persons are getting indicted and maybe convicted. I didn't cause that. The system, by not allowing athletes to be upfront about it and not doing more for the athletes who are generating the money, and that's going to be maybe later in this particular program, but later in life. But O'Bannon started it, so did King Culture started to a point, so did other lawsuits. Jeffrey Kessler's got a couple going. But the only way anyone listens in this country if you violate a law, well, they're no longer virgins now. I don't know how they protect themselves. And I'd like to, and I know this will be delayed for a minute or two for your audience hears it, but when I'm speaking, the main question I have is it took 2 years of investigation, and the NCAA enforcement never, ever knew this was going on. Talk about head in the sand. My God. I can't believe they either that naive, that slow, or they, in my opinion, they don't know what's happening in the world they run.
Well, let's follow up on that for a minute because I think that's really important. This is not a wake-up call. This is fundamentally different. As you said, indictments are a different kettle of fish. How far does this go? Does it reach the head coaches and the programs beyond 4 assistant coaches? And what are the consequences of where it ultimately goes?
Okay, I can't forecast. I'll just deal with what we know as of today. There are certain groups that are under investigation or maybe indicted tonight, tomorrow, whatever. What I understand with no knowledge other than, someone giving me information, that there will be more people under this particular case. But we do know some have already been indicted, some have already been let loose. So that I can react to. And I can say that these people are in a hell of a lot tougher situation than any scandal that may evolve over all of this. All time, okay? We've had illicit scandals in the NCAA since point fixing in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. We had athletes running around masquerading as students since the 1920s and magnified in Minnesota in 1998 when the coach told them not to go, to this horrendous thing we're looking at now at North Carolina, which they don't know what the hell they're going to do. At this point, they haven't made a thing. We've had everything imaginable. But here's what we never had before. The federal government. I would believe, using my own common sense and watching this thing happen, I would believe that the low men on the totem pole, and I say that sometimes in order of wage or money earned or the conspiracy that they derived and who benefited the most, I would think this time, for the first time ever, there are some people who may be facing going to prison for a day, a year, whatever, but a day in jail has got to be hell. Okay, so it's different than not being able to coach for 9 games. It's different from being fired as an assistant coach. It's jail. This is what legally we all led to believe is happening. And by other people's logic and reasoning and my logic, I would assume there would be other people maybe involved, even if there isn't. What it did was not shine a black light on college basketball. It showed a spotlight on college athletics. Forget basketball. Why would this not happen other places? Well, the only other place I would say it could happen would be football. Because football, if you think basketball is good, if you take away the tournament, you're really, that is basketball, the NCAA tournament. I mean, the guys lose 99 games and they're still, playing for their app. But football, with the billions of dollars, now the basketball tournament gets, I think, $20 billion the next contract they're going to get, okay? But football generates zillions of dollars every Saturday from all these 35 power, universities. Football is money off the wall. That it's like a Christmas tree when it gets barren and brown and starts dropping on the carpet and you got to get the sweeper up. That's money. Football is huge, and there are more people involved. You got players up to 95 on a roster. You got coaches into the 20s. I mean, you got specialists. And what else do you have? The money. The money is flowing. It's big.
So, Sonny, Sonny, bottom line of all of this for our listeners, international and domestic, regardless of whether somebody goes to jail for a day, a year, and no matter who it is, do more athletes, student athletes, athletes generally get more revenue out of this as a result or not?
Well, if you're asking me, that's a great question, and thank you for interrupting me. And I mean that sincerely. What I pray happens out of this, and I think it would be a solution, not the complete solution, and it won't be the final solution, but a solution, that if they paid the athletes, if they gave them some sort of a stipend over and above that silly thing called, cost of attendance, okay, then you may eliminate a lot of the financial problems that athletes face going in, but also you may eliminate the temptation of some people taking money illicitly. That may happen. I'm not saying it will, because society and people are different, okay? You may be a billionaire and want to be a $2 billionaire. We understand that. Logic says that's true. But you have to allow the public to understand that these athletes do more than show up on Saturday afternoon or Friday night to play basketball games. You have to understand that we've now bargained them out in their own bodies to another network, and the network is the media. They are bargained out for no pay, nothing. They still go on the field. They still hit their heads against the wall. The basketball athletes pay for all the scholarships in the terms of the NCAA, the swimmers, the yachters, the fencers, and all well and good. But how can they be responsible for everybody's education? And the other thing is the committee to bowls, they don't even share the money with the universities and scholarships for other people. They're run by individuals. How can bowl promoters get millions of dollars? Now, to answer your question, if money doesn't trickle down to the athletes, I believe I'll finally see. I would love to see, and I hope it doesn't come, and that means there's change. The day when the athletes stand, instead of kneeling, instead of saluting, instead of doing anything, not showing up for class, if they ever not showed up for a ball game, and I'm not saying the kneeling was, I commend what they did. It's a different subject here. But I'm saying in order to raise attention to the plight of the athlete while they're in universities, if they don't show up to play in one of these bowl games, these Final Four games, or the NCAA finals, you will find all the partners of the NCAA cancel the contracts. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the power of the athlete. If they don't show up, it'll change in a minute because they have to pay the athletes then.
It is, by the way, an incredible perspective from Sonny Vaccaro, who nobody could argue has more history and more perspective and more understanding of this area, frankly, than anybody alive. Rick Horrow, sports professor, Beyond the Scoreboard. Be back in a minute.